Henry V is the story of a young prince. A prince who, unlike Hamlet, is keen to fulfill his role pretty convincingly. He's a young man who, after years of dissipation, drunken revelling and bad behaviour, all of which Shakespeare recounts in Henry IV Parts 1 and 2, is ready to prove himself. His father dies without much hope in his young progeny. Again, like Hamlet, Henry feels the burden of parental expectations. But unlike the Danish prince, he goes well beyond those expectations, sharing with us his journey from madcap prince to full military hero and national treasure. The play tells his story as the young, green, inexperienced sovereign faces the scorn of the French king, only to defy all expectations. He invades France, on a pretty flimsy pretext, with a small army and defeats the French against all odds. By the end of the play, Henry is King of England and France, married to the French king's daughter. This insubstantial, windswept island stuck in the northwest corner of Europe is now a major player, and one the continent will underestimate at its peril. Or until Henry VI cocks it up anyway, but that's a different story. Henry V provides the perfect narrative in time of national struggle and national revival. Not surprisingly, Laurence Olivier's famous film version was made during the Second World War to remind a nation both defiant and terrified that plucky old England still had it in her to defy a greater enemy, that splendid isolation was a price worth paying, and national sacrifice is never futile. Yet, we would be very wrong to dismiss this play simply as propaganda. A simple, clear plot is suggested by the facts of history. But the facts of history only provide a basic template, just like Shakespeare's other sources do in the tragedies and the comedies. For the sake of storytelling, historical facts work pretty well, but Shakespeare uses history as a pretext, a springboard for his own psychological analysis of the characters. Henry is not simply idealized or idolized. As ever in Shakespeare, we understand his humanity. As is the case in Lear, His Majesty the King is revealed just as he is, without most of the filters. The king is naked. His heroism is rooted in his ability to be human. The play contains a warning too. It begins like a Greek tragedy, with the chorus desperately asking for inspiration as the playwright's voice is afraid he might be promising more than he can deliver. Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention, a kingdom for a stage, princes to act and monarchs to behold the swelling scene. Then should the warlike Harry, like himself, assume the port of Mars, and at his heels, Lichting like hounds, should famine, sword, and fire crouch for employment. But pardon, gentles all, the flat and razed spirits that have dared on this unworthy scaffold to bring forth so great an object. Can this cockpit hold the vasty fields of France? Or may we cram within this wooden O the very casks that did affright the air at Agincourt? Oh, pardon, since a crooked figure may attest in little place a million. Let us ciphers to this great account on your imaginary forces work. Suppose, within the girdle of these walls, are now confined two mighty monarchies, whose high upreared and abutting fronts the perilous narrow ocean parts asunder. Piece out our imperfections with your thoughts, into 1,000 parts divide on man, and make imaginary puissance. Think, when we talk of horses, that you see them, printing their proud hoofs in the receiving earth. For 'tis your thoughts, and now must deck our kings, carry them here and there, jumping o' times, turning the accomplishment of many years into an hourglass. For the which supply, admit me chorus to this history, who prologue-like your humble patience pray, gentle to hear, kindly to judge, our play. Now who is Shakespeare appealing to? His muse? Partly, but also us, the audience. We are in the driving seat. The book is pushed halfway across the table. We need to do part of the work. Our imagination is also appealed to, and that is a key ingredient for this story to work. The globe is that wooden O that Shakespeare mentions in his speech, of course. And it's, once more, the theatre of life on which these extraordinary and ordinary events will be staged. It is our thoughts that must piece out the playwright's imperfections in order for the plays to work. After all, this is, as the speech tells us right at the end, at least partly, our play. This is our performance. This is our story. It is one of the most powerful beginnings of any of Shakespeare's plays, and all the more so because it pretends to be otherwise. Like an accomplished after-dinner speaker who claims not to be very articulate, only to charm the listeners afterwards, the author promises little, but delivers so much more. It is also disarmingly honest. Shakespeare warns us that the history of official records can be bent and can be twisted. He also tells us he needs us, the audience, for the story to be told. But the story is true to itself. Like an early version of The Crown, it will give us the illusion of access behind palace doors and will reveal to us the truth about what it means to be a man and to be a king. So what's in it for us? Henry V has it all. There will be battles, action, conflict, suspense, violence, a wooing, a marriage, and a happy ending for the country as a whole. In other words, there'll be plenty of drama. Drama in order to tell a story. Drama to give a version of history. The poet's voice uses the stage, in other words, to put the facts of history in perspective, to give it, as Theseus tells us in A Midsummer Night's Dream, a local habitation and a name. What's there not to like? The protagonist of this play is a puzzling chap, and someone who keeps his cards up his sleeve. Henry the man can be understated, moody, quiet even. His private persona is that of someone who wants to learn from his older officers and who's fully aware of the magnificent task he faces. There is no boasting, no rhetoric, no unnecessary words, to begin with, until he occupies a public stage in front of his men. And then his language is on fire. The muse helps him to use words to shape his men's actions. As Winston Churchill showed, rhetoric can be essential in motivating a people. As a war leader, he knew how to be the part and speak the part. Attitude, he said, is a little thing that can make a very big difference. And here's Henry addressing his men before one of his biggest battles. Once more into the breach, dear friends, once more. Close the wall up with our English dead. In peace there's nothing so becomes a man as modest stillness and humility. When the blast of war blows in our ears, then imitate the action of the tiger. Stiffen the sinews, summon up the blood, disguise fair nature with hard-favoured rage. Then lend the eye a terrible aspect, let pry through the portage of the head like the brass cannon, let the brow of Wilmot as fearfully as doth a gallied rock or hang and jutty his confounded base, swilled with the wild and wasteful ocean. Now set the teeth, and stretch the nostrils wide, hold hard the breath, and bend up every spirit to his full height. On, you noblest English! His blood is fed from fathers of war-proof, fathers that, like so many Alexanders, have in these parts from morn till even fought and sheathed their swords for lack of argument. Dishonour not your mothers. Now attest that those whom you call fathers did beget you. Be copy now to men of grosser blood, and teach them how to war. And you, good yeoman, whose limbs were made in England, show us here the mettle of your pasture. Let us swear that you are worth your breeding, which I doubt not. For there is none of you so mean and base that hath not noble lustre in your eyes. I see you stand like greyhounds in the slips, straining upon the start. The game's afoot. Follow your spirit, and upon this charge, cry God for Harry, England, and St. George. Now, it's fair to say this is a pretty inspiring speech. It's chilling, too. Would you lose your life for this man? What he's appealing to is a sense of common Englishness. And so the king talks to the foot soldiers, appealing to their common blood. He talks about their fathers and their mothers. This is a personal war. This is a personal affair. Without nobility of birth, is it a question of association? All these peasant soldiers being so close to the king? Or is it a question of race and blood? When Henry tells us at the end of the speech that the game's afoot, he's creating suspense, of course. He's galvanizing his soldiers, but also, I think, galvanizing the spectators, preparing us for the action to come. There'll be plenty of it. So in this play, Shakespeare is creating a myth. He's not that concerned with the facts of history. This play is, at least partly, political propaganda. Shakespeare's audience would have been very familiar with the myth of Elizabeth I, riding a white horse, her long red hair unleashed, wearing a breastplate of armour. She addressed a small force of poorly equipped troops assembled at Tilbury as the Spanish Armada was about to invade. She offered to live and die amongst you all, to lay down for my God and for my kingdom and my people, my honour and my blood. She also, like Henry, portrayed herself both as fully human and yet superhuman. I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too. She too, like Churchill, like Henry himself, mobilized the English language and sent it into battle. So what are we to make of this? Now, arguably, we live in times when we are much more suspicious of rhetorical flourishes, especially when coming from those in charge. But rhetoric is important, and it's always there. The "call me Dave" mantra doesn't diminish the authority of a prime minister, after all. In Henry's case, we can see his speech as an exercise in psychological warfare at the expense of his own side. Here is a king, engaged in a spurious war for which there was no need, other than an opportunity to strengthen the sovereign's political power by military means, who manages to manipulate an army of desperate men, peddling the narrative of national, even racial superiority to justify his actions, and selling the line, "We're all in this together." Now, the National Theatre production of the play after the Iraq War clearly showed Henry as a Tony Blair figure without the chumminess. Yet this play was used in World War II, as I explained earlier, and indeed this very speech declaimed to the troops waiting to embark before the Normandy landings in 1944. We can also read it in a very different way, as a heartfelt and sincere piece, showing the spirit and nature of comradeship, a sense of purpose, and a clear unifying desire to forget about differences in the face of a common enemy. Harry wants to bring out the best of British, or English anyway. So the jury is out, and as ever, Shakespeare gives us that choice. Take the St. Crispin's Day speech, spoken just before the defining battle in the war, Agincourt. He that outlives this day and comes safe home will stand at tiptoe when the day is named, and rouse him with the name of Crispian. He that shall live this day and see old age will yearly on the vigil feast his neighbours and say, "Tomorrow is St. Crispian." Then will he strip his sleeve and show his scars and say, "These wounds I had on Crispin's day." All men forget, yet all shall be forgot, but he'll remember with advantages what feats he did that day. Then shall our names, familiar in his mouth as household words, Harry the King, Bedford and Exeter, Warwick and Talbot, Salisbury and Gloucester, be in their flowing cups freshly remembered. The story shall the good man teach his son, and Crispin Crispian should ne'er go by from this day to the ending of the world, but we in it shall be remembered. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers, for he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. Being e'er so vile, this day shall gentle his condition. And gentlemen in England now abed shall think themselves accursed that we're not here, and hold their manhoods cheap whilst any speaks that fought with us upon St. Crispin's day. The speech is awe-inspiring and rhetorically very interesting. Again, what Henry is doing is appealing to our common humanity. He talks to the soldiers as if they were his dear friends. Modest, stillness, and humility are not words we normally associate with war heroes, but Harry knows how to use them to make himself appear to be just one of the lads. But patriotism is a question of common humanity. People need to know what they're fighting for, and words such as home and neighbours appear in the speech to show that this is a defensive war, when in fact it wasn't. This story, Shakespeare tells us, shall the good man teach his sons. The lessons of history, which immortalizes men's actions, is one of the promises Harry makes to his troops, as if through their death they were somehow to defeat mortality, a paradox. We few, we happy few, points to something very important indeed. This is a man who treats his soldiers as if they were part of a very special club. From violence, love. From love, violence. For he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. These are words from a man speaking to his men, showing that war is something that will bind you forever. One could argue even more strongly than love. So here the king is speaking to his troops as a kind of father figure, a pater familias, showing intimacy, or displaying it anyway, and a sense of momentum, trying, as he does, to convince his men they are making history. This is a war that will make them immortal. Now, you would need to have a heart of stone to deny the speech is moving, but we need to be aware and a bit wary of any politician who tries to be too chummy with his constituents. There are often hidden reasons behind it. He's not heavily implying that the soldier's greatness derives, at least in good part, from association with those who really are noble, really are in charge, and always will be. As Salisbury and Talbot will always be remembered, and they are. The foot soldiers and the archers, as pawns in the context of Henry's war games, possibly, but that is all. And so I'm always conflicted when hearing Shakespeare's history plays. You see, you just never know what to think, but think we must. We must think about the nature of power as a tool to oppress, but also a means to inspire and an instrument to save a nation. About art as propaganda, too. And in the case of Henry, about the institution and notion of monarchy itself. Shakespeare's kings and queens are ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. They reflect a time when the sacred nature of the crown was not meant to be doubted, but we almost always see them as uneasy in the role. And it is a role, which is why the medium of theatre works so well to represent its ambiguity. Monarchy confers the expectation, the illusion of greatness, but it's also a flimsy sandwich board passed on from actor to actor, and the crown no more or better than a stage prop. Like acting, it would only work so long as a willing audience is prepared to accept its myth. Just as Prospero the magician reminds us in The Tempest, once the revels are ended and the magic staff broken, we deal with a very different reality. And so the histories show our own lives writ large. They teach us to beware any delusions of grandeur. We all want to be sovereigns of our own little kingdoms. We all believe in our own exceptionality, and as Shakespeare puts it, dressed in a little brief authority, have our own moment playing the king. But reality is different, and that includes the real kings. The historical Henry was an even more complex man than the play suggests. As much a war hero as he was a war criminal, someone far removed from Shakespeare's portrayal. He died of dysentery, which wouldn't make great theatre. But that is not the point. In his portrayal, Shakespeare leaves the door open for our own judgment, and the king is never too different from ourselves. In this play, we learn about courage and about hubris and arrogance. They are only as real as we believe them to be. In a play where the key character is defined by rhetoric, we are encouraged to be suspicious of wordplay. We marvel at Henry's persuasive speeches, and yet we're given every opportunity to see through them and debunk them for what they are. Like all of Shakespeare's best characters, Henry is both exceptional and uncomfortably familiar. Arguably, the statue the author erects for him is also ready to be toppled. There's an ancient Italian proverb which says, "La possa del tempo scopre la verità," or "the power of time unveils truth." Truth is naked. Yet, there is more than one truth when it comes to judging the past. The histories show it. All kings, young, aging, or old, have this in common. They cannot help but show us they are ordinary. One of England's best kings, on paper anyway, is also just a man. But so is one of England's worst.